I'll just set my stall out for a second, if I may. When I was privileged enough to be in Parliament for 5 years, had a vote come up in 2010 and 2015, my time there, I would have voted against it, probably on the grounds of it opens a door to an escalation that I would be uncomfortable with. It's difficult to disagree with someone who is facing a terminal illness, their urge, their wish to end their life as they wish with dignity. But as we've seen in other countries, the law can change and evolve to allow it, perhaps, to apply in areas where we may not have imagined. However, having witnessed firsthand and closely what I think is the shocking treatment of end-of-life care for some people who wish to die, but actually are not able to, I would vote differently now. And I realise, you know, that's not something I think is a simple thing to do. Has the mood of Parliament changed that you think there will be a vote on the law of assisted dying?
So, Nick, first of all, I'm really sorry about your experience. And in truth, lots of people over the, whatever it is now, 10 or 15 years that I've been campaigning on this, have come to change their mind after personal experience. So many people who've been through the death or the horrible end of a loved one, or watch somebody suffer in front of them, or indeed experience it themselves, become very, if you like, encapsulated about the sense of control that having assisted dying can give to somebody who's in extremis. And that wave, if you like, of change has certainly broken in the House of Commons. I mean, we last voted on this in 2015, just after the general election, and the House voted to reject. But since then, we've had, a couple of general elections. A new demographic has come in, and quite a lot of campaigners, like people like Noel Conway, who sadly died a year or so ago, who campaigned on this, and then high-profile people like, of course, Esther Ranson, just in the last week or so, and Prue Leith, who's campaigned hard on this over the years, have done sterling work to try and push the mood. And, of course, the British people overwhelmingly support having assisted dying. We're well over 70% and towards 80% support in polling. So, I do think the time is coming. I'm not sure it'll be this Parliament. I think probably next Parliament. And what we're asking for, those who are campaigning on this, is what we're asking for is a simple thing, really, which is that all parties should have in their manifesto a pledge to allow government time for a bill to be brought forward on a free vote of the House of Commons for a change in the law. And that seems like a fairly modest ask in the face of what's a huge campaign.
It is a modest ask, but notwithstanding my views, I also know that many of the concerns that would be advocated by those who would probably oppose such a measure coming into law would be, for example, the idea of the thin edge of the wedge. So, for example, we've seen in some countries, and I think Holland is one of them. I'm happy to be corrected on this, and I'm referring to an article that I read earlier this week, where, for example, assisted dying was legalised, and then it effectively became legalised later on for mental illness and agonies, to the point that you could effectively demonstrate mental distress and be allowed to end your life. And that's something I would consider quite abhorrent at this stage. Who knows, I might change my view. How do you, as a Parliament, decide what you would be voting on? What law change would it be, and what checks and balances would there be?
Well, to be honest with you, Nick, I mean, we hear the slippery slope argument, and you will have heard it in your time as a parliamentarian in lots of areas.
I used it.
So the slippery slope argument was used about the introduction of abortion when that was legalised in the 60s. The slippery slope argument is used in relation to things like gay marriage. Every kind of step forward, there is this idea that you're opening the door. But in truth, what we see around the world, and of course there are growing numbers of countries that have assisted dying in some way, dignity at the end of life in some way, is that each country designs it for their own cultural model. And we can do that for ourselves as well. We're a 1,000-year-old democracy. We're perfectly capable of shaping this thing for a UK context. And what we've said, what we're campaigning for, is a law that says that if two doctors agree that you are within 6 months of the end of your life, and a judge agrees that you have a settled will that you want to end your life in a way that is under your control, then you should be allowed to have it. So you would have to have mental capacity. You would have to have some kind of terminal disease that doctors agree is going to end your life, in all probability, in 6 months. And in those circumstances, we think there's a case for it, not least because, Nick, as you will know, there are some really horrible diseases out there where no matter what palliative care you're given, you can be given the best palliative care in the world, you are still going to die in a horrible way. Motor neurone disease, for example, which slowly freezes your body, and then finally, the final act is to freeze your ability to breathe while your brain is still functioning normally. These horrible diseases, though, there's very little doctors can do to assist you. You know, those people need to have and want to have and deserve to have, and I would say have a right to have, a sense of control at the end of their life. And we think that if you can get two doctors and a judge to agree with you, then you should be able to access it. It's also worth saying, Nick, that while there are other models around the world, there are also other models, for example, of abortion. So if you go to Canada, which is one of the countries that's cited by opponents of assisted dying, Canada it's legal to have an abortion up to the day before the baby is born. Now, that's not an argument, I don't think, for us not to have abortion. As I say, we're a mature democracy. We could decide for ourselves. And I think the time has come for us to consider this change in the law.
It's interesting you mentioned Canada. I was reading that Jarro Kotalik, who is a Canadian bioethics professor who gave evidence, I think, to the Health Select Committee, who've been looking into this issue, as I understand it. He was basically saying there is a risk, and he believes it's happened in Canada, where doctors do decide, probably similar to what you've outlined, a number of doctors having to approve things, but basically where it ends up with you're effectively offering death over treatment or care to cut medical costs. That's a pretty horrific image he builds there, isn't it?
Yeah, and as I say, there's a lot of mythology and misinformation about other countries. But to be honest with you, I'm less interested in other countries than I am in the UK context. Right? And as I said, Nick, we are perfectly capable of designing a framework of safeguards in the UK that allows us to have this compassionate and merciful release for people in extremis, in the same way that we design a framework for things like abortion. And the argument that other countries do it in a different way and is not one, I think, that is a sensible one for us. The other key thing to say is that while all of those countries have designed it for their own context, there isn't a single country that's repealed it. Where there's been an outcry from the population to repeal it. So what people who argue against are saying is that all those Canadians and Australians and Americans and Dutch, that they're all sort of some kind of monsters who don't care about the lives of their fellow citizens. And I think that's just not tenable.
Well, I certainly wouldn't be suggesting that. I'd like to touch on something that I think was really influential in me changing my mind. In this country, Kit, I have this belief we handle end of life appallingly. One of the issues that I remember being confronted with in the family was a situation where someone's dignity effectively has gone. This was a case where someone had effectively refused treatment, was in pain. We had the absurdity of a hospital having agreed to someone who's essentially said, I want no further treatment, and they would give him drug relief. What actually happened was he was clearly in discomfort at one stage, several days down the road, and they said, we cannot give you any more pain relief because you're only allowed to give it every 4 hours. I mean, what could happen? He was going to die. And then we had the shocking statement, rather, because he hadn't died, if you like, quickly, was obviously in discomfort. The hospital then said, we don't really know how to deal with death in this ward or this hospital. Dignity, I think, I remember it being lost when no nurses were there to change this person, and his own children had to change their father in these circumstances. Surely there's something wrong in our hospital culture, that cannot deal with death. And in a way, I'm not sure this should be the answer to it, whilst I support it. Surely we have to look at what's going on in the hospitals.
Oh, I completely agree with you. And I think we need to do both, right? The two are not mutually exclusive. Having excellent end-of-life care, and there are some areas that do it very well. In my constituency, we're lucky enough to have a brilliant hospice that does a fantastic job, but it's not uniform across the country. And I do think we could do a lot more to make sure that palliative care is kind of top class in the world, uniformly across the country.
I should stress this was actually in a hospital, not palliative care, a hospice.
Well, wherever the end-of-life care is given, then it needs to be done sensitively and with dignity. I completely agree with you. But as I say, the two are not mutually exclusive. And the key thing to say, Nick, that I always say to opponents, look, end-of-life care, dignity in dying, assisted dying is not compulsory, right? In those countries where they have it, it's not compulsory. You don't have to have it. And in fact, in somewhere like Oregon, which is the closest model to the one that we're proposing, they've had it for 25 years, and they've had zero problems with it. The majority of people who have these horrible terminal diseases don't use assisted dying. But critically, what it does give people is it frees them from fear. So if you get diagnosed with motor neuron disease, you pretty much know straight away how you're going to die. And you live in fear until that moment.
Kit, Sorry, do finish your point.
But having the ability to control your end releases you from that fear and means that you can take real joy and value from what time you have left. Right, and that's the key thing, I think, that I would want that control at the end of my life so that I could live my life as I wanted to, knowing that if I really needed it, I could have that dignity in my end.
Kit, I've actually got someone on the line who wants to raise a question that's more about the parliamentary process and whether it will be successful or not, and offering an alternative. So would you mind if I just brought her in to ask this question? Sure. Rachel, hello. Rachel, you've got an idea that you'd like to put forward on this subject, yeah?
Oh, well, it was. I listened last week to Jake Berry, who was also discussing this on talkTV. Yep. And my concern is that if it's just a parliamentary vote, the politicians are just going to vote with what they think. Whereas I think it's too big of an issue.
So what's your idea?
I think there should be a referendum on something such as big as this. I think everyone should have their say.
Rachel,
and I just really quickly.
No, I won't lose you. I'll keep you on the line, Rachel. But you've asked that question. We've got a very senior politician on the line. Let's get his reaction to your idea. So stay there, Rachel.
Okay. Well, listen, it is good thinking, and of course, other countries like Ireland have had referendums on similar kind of moral issues. But as you will know, Nick, it's a slightly difficult one because what would need to happen is that the House of Commons would need to vote for there to be a referendum. So effectively, the House of Commons, those people who would oppose assisted dying would vote against there being a referendum because they know that 80% of the British people vote for it, and I would vote for there being a referendum. And so effectively, you'd have a proxy vote in the House of Commons. I just think, I mean, I understand the desire for a referendum, and I think it's a good one if we could get there. But in my view, I just don't think lawmakers can shirk their responsibility in this because we need to remember that doing nothing is an active choice because you are consigning thousands of people to a horrible, agonizing death by keeping the law as it is. And so parliamentarians can't shy away from this. They need to make a decision, and that's where we'd like to get to in the next month.
I know you have to go, but I'll just bring Rachel back in at this point. Rachel, I mean, that makes sense in a way, doesn't it? Shouldn't we try Parliament MPs first, and then maybe it'll end up lobbying for a referendum? Who knows?
It does make sense, but the reason that I thought this was because when Jake Berry was talking about it, I'm not criticising him, so you don't have to worry. But he was saying to everyone on the show that he is against it, assisted dying, because of his brother, and he assisted his brother at the end of his life. Not you know what I mean.
Yes.
And he said that because of that, and how close he felt that he got to his brother, and how positive an experience it was for him, that he would vote against it. But how does he know what the people of his constituency feel about it. He's voting on his experience and how he feels, but what do our MPs know?
Rachel, listen, thank you for putting that call. Time reasons only, I'm going to take that point, because actually this is, Rachel makes a key point here that I'll summarise if I make it, is that here I am, an MP, a former MP, who would have voted against this, and yet the experience changed me. Most MPs probably have not had an experience of it. Isn't that the challenge for you?
Well, that is a bit of a challenge, and to be honest with you, I hope they never do. Right? It's a horrible thing, as you know, Nick, to go through, to watch somebody you love die in these awful circumstances. And so we have to try and persuade them that, you know, if you don't want to have assisted dying, you don't have to. Just please don't stop me having it if I want it, and don't stop my family having it, right? So that's the thing. It's not compulsory. It's not a slippery slope. We can design it appropriately for those people who want it in this country. And of course, the great tragedy, Nick, the real inequality here, is that I can have assisted dying actually if I want to, because I can afford to go to Switzerland. Right? If you've got 50 grand, which I'm lucky enough to have, I can have business class assisted dying, and that's what Esther Ranson was talking about.
That's a very good point.
For me, the real tragedy is all those people who can't afford it, who die in horror and degradation and pain, who would like to have some control at the end of their life to make the most fundamental choice they can about their own lives.
Kit, I hope this is going to continue. I'm convinced there will be a vote, but I agree with you, it probably won't be in this Parliament. I hope very much I can have you back to talk about this more, as I believe it is going to be a crucial issue for us to decide. Thank you so much for joining us. Happy Christmas. Just a tip here, you need to get a more Christmassy jumper, Kit.
Oh, right, yeah, sorry. I toned it down so there was no interference on the screen.